Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's webinar. Really glad you're able to join us if you're joining us live, and if you're watching this back after the fact, appreciate you consuming our content. We've got Amanda from the Bytecode team here today to talk about all the work they've been doing with LLM tuning and optimization, particularly as it relates to the Looker Explorer Assistant. There's been, I think, over the last 6 months, this like booming dialogue and conversation around how you can use LLMs to ask questions, natural language questions on top of Looker, and maybe not enough demystifying of like how you actually do that, what going from okay to good to great looks like. And so I'm really excited to have Amanda joining us today to talk about that. Before I hand over to her, just a heads up, if this is the first time you're joining or watching one of these webinars, we do these every other week. They're entirely focused on Looker related topics. They're not selling any software, in our case, spectacles or consulting service or anything like that. It's really just about providing information to the Looker community, getting everyone together, helping everyone upskill. And I'm excited next week to have the team from Paradigm. They're going to talk about end-to-end testing across DBT and Looker with a new integration they've built into spectacles. So I said these are every other week. We happen to be having two back-to-back weeks because we had to reschedule one as a result of me being unwell. But so yeah, if you head over to LinkedIn or head to the Spectacles website, you'll be able to register for that webinar and join us there this time next week. And so on that note, I'm going to hand over to Amanda. I'm going to let her introduce herself properly and let her tell you all about the work they've been doing with LLMs. I will rejoin at the end for a Q&A. If you have questions while the presentation is ongoing, just drop them in the chat in YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you are, and we'll see them and we'll aim to get them answered at the end of the presentation. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And Amanda, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. Great to be here today. I appreciate everyone joining to listen to me talk. Hopefully you find this helpful. So as Dylan mentioned, I am with Google, or Bytecode, who is a Google partner. Full stack data and analytics engineering, deep Looker expertise. We've deployed over 1,000 customers from startups to enterprise organizations. And so today we're just going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing, some experiences that we've had. It's becoming a really hot topic recently, as I'm sure you're aware. So we've been helping customers expand those capabilities in the analytics space. For many, this has been a black box. A lot of business users hope it's a magic button that's going to solve all the problems. But we data folks know that there's never good data output without good data input. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about that today. So we're going to go over what are we doing? What are we doing with the Looker Explorer Assistant today? These are some of the common topics. And we're going to briefly discuss those use cases, how we approach the solutions, some of the techniques we've used for prompt engineering, quick walkthrough of fine-tuning, and finally we'll wrap up with a few tips and tricks for optimization. So let's hop into it. And some of you may have been hands-on already, or maybe you've watched some of the Spectacles webinars. They've been really great. And some of you may have just seen a quick demo or heard murmurings of what this is. But I'll just kind of take a minute to touch on the problems that we're solving with the Looker Explorer Assistant. So we want to make data more accessible. And this is what we're calling the next level of self-service analytics. This is Bob. He has lots of questions. Looker is a fantastic, powerful tool, but the reality is not everyone is going to want to use an Explorer. And analysts don't want to build reports over and over for the inevitable follow-up questions that Bob's going to ask. You know, when you get it done and he's like, this is great, but can I get this by month, by brand, or actually make that by week? So fellow analysts, I bet you feel that as deeply as I do. So while traditional Looker has come leaps and bounds in making data more self-serve, AI is giving it that piece that's been lacking. It's that true self-service where even Bob can find things on his own. And from our experience, this is probably the most common use case we're seeing today. People are just starting to get their hands around it, trying to understand how this is going to work. So while helping Bob is important, there are a lot of other use cases, and we're solving those problems for customers too. I really love this example at Office Space. So Looker analytics here have been directly integrated with their product using AI. It's a seamless user experience where you can complete an action, such as reserve a desk, or ask for analytics within the same chatbot, lovingly named Aussie. Hello, Aussie. So then you might ask questions like, how many users reserved a desk? And so you're getting at that really seamless experience, and then it's going to show you a visual where you can go explore it and ask some more questions about it. In a similar vein, we've been actively working with this type of customer-facing solution for industries ranging from farming to healthcare to SaaS. And making data accessible in this way is directly impacting decisions and insights around things like quality patient care, business forecasting, and produce markets in a very fast and intuitive way. So this is an example on the left side of what you get out of the box from an architecture perspective. And then on the right-hand side is an example of a production architecture that we've helped a customer deploy. So looking at the left, you get a really great starting point. The core concept here is that you have a front end for the user to interact with. In this case, it's an extension framework within Looker. But keep in mind, you can build on this. So there you have the option for a BigQuery or Cloud Function backend. We've been using the Cloud Function when we need more flexibility and when we need to scale, because it allows you to create some custom code. You can reference tuned models. You can add in some extra steps, that sort of thing. You also notice that on the right-hand side, there's an API gateway, which does not exist on the left-hand side. So out of the box, the way that the authentication is working between Looker and the backend is just a signature. So there's a signature check to make sure it's valid. And that works fine. But some people, when they're talking about a production external facing use case, they want to feel like there's a little bit more security there. So in this case, you can add in that API gateway. You can lock down the API to only that Cloud Function. And then you're actually storing the API key there in a user attribute within Looker. So all of that is sent within the prompt at runtime. The front end you can also totally customize, but there's also, you can do within a chatbot, or you can take that extension framework and make it feel like your own. You can add your own logo. You can do a lot of those different things. So I just like people to keep that in mind when they're looking at this deployment. It's not just what you see here. There's a lot more you can build on here and make it work for lots of different use cases. So I mentioned a little bit about what gets sent at runtime, that prompt. So prompts are the instructions for the LLM to know what you're asking it to do. And I like to think of it as you're onboarding a new analyst and you're asking that analyst to do some kind of task. So if you have a new analyst coming on, presumably they have some experience in the analytics space or your industry vertical, but that analyst doesn't know your specific organization or specific terms you might use, how those reports should be put together, that sort of thing. So similarly, by definition, an LLM already has extensive training, but to complete the specific thing you want it to do, you still have to give it some instructions. So what's happening under the hood? Well, apparently it's just math. I interviewed one of our insanely smart data scientists at Bytecode. She worked in the AI space many years ago when you had to host your own infrastructure and handwrite your own models. And she said it was just math, which for me was gross. Some of you might love math, but that's not me. So at that time, it would take months or years to deploy a model that only had a very small scope of what it could answer. And they would have to try lots of different types of models, and all it was doing was computing distances between vectors to understand what the most likely answer should be based on what someone was asking. So even though we don't have to write a bunch of math now, thank goodness, Gemini is still doing all of that under the hood, calculating distances with amazing compute power. And that was certainly another consideration, is this wouldn't be possible without the compute power within the cloud. And this particular data scientist was talking about how when she would deploy a model, she literally had to keep her laptop open for days just to try to deploy a small model. So we are fortunate to be in the day and age of something like a Gemini. So if it's just math, then what do we do with a prompt? Glad you asked. There are some good documents available in regards to prompt strategies. Prompt engineering is now even a separate job title in some places. So I'm sure there's a lot of amazing approaches that I don't know yet, but here's what I've seen with the Explore Assistant. We've had good success with this type of format. So there are some prompt instructions already included in the open source repo, and that's going to work fine. But I like to call out that you can make this your own. You can test out different things. But when you do, be concise. You want to clearly articulate. Don't give it too much information. Just like an analyst, if you give them more information than what they need, they're probably going to get confused. And one of the most important things we can do is leverage examples. One example is worth, 100 words. But also keep in mind, order and format really does matter. We've worked with a client recently where they had the same type of content that you would see here, but they didn't specifically have it in this order. They would include the examples first and then the context. And then they were saying, don't do this would be one of the last things that they said. And they were really not happy with how long it was taking for that to process. So this is another area where you're going to want to, try this first, because we have had good results with this, but also, test out some different things. If you're seeing that things are taking a long time or you're not happy with the results, prompt engineering is one of the first places that I'd recommend starting. So when we are running the Explore Assistant, as is probably obvious by the name, we are asking it to generate an Explore URL. So I really like to call out, we're not sending data anywhere. All we're asking Gemini, in this case, to do is take the information we've given it, the instructions and examples, which we will provide, and translate the user question into the appropriate URL. So in the expanded URL, we have every single piece of context that we need to understand what's happening in that Explore. The fields that are selected, the fields that are, or the filters that are applied, if we're sorting, and what the row limit would be, and also visuals, things like that, which is not included in this example. When you are thinking about what examples you want to provide, one important piece of this to keep in mind is a variety of the URLs that are hard, specifically around dates. So if you think about a date, you have relative and absolute, you have between, you have all different formats that can happen with a date filter. Those are the things that are the most complicated and probably the areas where you're going to struggle the most with getting the results that you want. So as you're going through this, just keep that in mind. And also keeping in mind that we don't want to overwhelm and give too much. So if we don't really care what the visual answer is, everything we leave out of this URL will just default to whatever Looker would create, which most of the time probably works just fine. So how do we provide those examples? We have to create a JSON file. And how do we easily get there? So what we recommend is we start with a Google Sheet. We input the example question. So what are my top 10 brands that sold last week? And give it the appropriate URL response. And you're going to want to do at least 20 when you start, but that's probably still not going to be where you want it to be. You're probably going to want to get closer to 50 or even 100. And you'll notice here, again, we're only including the input of the question and the output of the specific aspects that we actually need the answer to include, which is the field parameter and the filter parameter. Another important piece of this, you're gonna have to iterate. You're not gonna be happy the first time around. So make sure that you're setting that expectation internally when you deploy this. This is an ongoing exercise. It's gonna take us a while to get to a decent place. And even from then, we're gonna need to keep iterating as time goes on. It's really easy to add more examples after deployment. There's a script in the open source repo, which you can see here. It's just a Python script that's loading examples. So you'll do it the first time during deployment, but then you can just run the script again, and it will remove everything that's in the BigQuery table and replace it with whatever you have in this file. So you can continue to add to that file until you're giving enough variety that you're happy with the results. So how do you know if people are happy with those results, and how do you know what people are even asking? One approach that we've taken is creating this chat history dashboard. This is really great to answer some of those questions, like how many users are actually using this? What are the questions that are being asked? When is it happening? Where do I maybe need to focus on adding in some additional examples because I'm getting negative feedback? And another great thing about having it as a Looker dashboard is you could set up some alerting on this. So if you're starting to see a very high number of negative feedback, that may be something you want to alert on so that you can address it quickly. When we implemented this, we did have to make adjustments to the front end code to write this to a BigQuery table. But I do believe in a release soon, there's going to be this history already included within the repo. So keep your eyes open for that. So let's talk a little bit about fine tuning. Like when does that even make sense? We talked about how we make examples and how we need to include a lot to probably be happy with what the output is going to be. But after a while, that can be a whole lot of examples that are running at runtime. So you might be including 50 examples all within that prompt that's being sent to the model at the time the user asks a question. So the benefit of fine tuning would be if you want to include hundreds or more examples, and you can actually tune that model ahead of time. So the model already has that context. You don't have to send in so much information when the user asks the question. So more examples is better results without a bigger prompt. And why do we care about a bigger prompt? That's because the bigger the prompt, the more tokens, the longer it's going to take to process, which I think is kind of intuitive. But you might experience some latency, things like that. So if you're getting to a large number of examples to get it where you need to be, fine-tuning is certainly an aspect that you can explore. It's actually not that complicated to do. You just have to format the examples a little bit differently, and there's documentation available for that. Feel free to reach out if you're having trouble finding it. Happy to share that. But it's the same concept. I would just go to the Google Sheet. I would add in all of my examples. I would download that as a CSV. And the easiest thing is just to run a script to format it in the right way. And within the Vertex AI interface, there's right in the model garden, or sometimes I think right even on the landing page, you'll see the prompt to fine tune a model. And there's only a couple of steps. You just have to give it the file and give it a name and the model that you want to tune, and you can kick it off. Right now, the only Gemini model that can be fine-tuned is 1.0, but I've heard that in the very near future, you're going to see 1.5 available for fine-tuning as well. So those things are changing all the time. Okay, so a couple of things that I wanted to share, just some things that we've found helpful when optimizing, especially in some of the larger deployments. Optimize the prompt, so smaller prompts, faster processing. We just talked about that. Streaming responses can give a better user experience. So we've had the question come up recently where we really don't like it that our user has to wait 5 seconds before they start to see an answer come up. But if you're streaming that response, they will receive the response as it's being processed, that's how you see it if you go out and interact with gemini.google.com. You'll see the streaming response so that you are getting interaction very quickly. Lowering the temperature will actually give you a faster response time. That's just a parameter that you can change. The point of a temperature is to allow more creativity or less creativity in those answers. So if you're looking for a really wacky response, you might put a high temperature. But if you're just creating Explore URLs, make that really low, and that actually does improve your response time. One interesting call out, I was speaking with somebody at Google recently, where they've seen that if you have a lot of multi-turn, after a while, all of that context is being passed back to the model with each question that you ask. You can actually code that there's a summarization of the multi-turn after, maybe 5 turns, so that you're not sending in all the question and all the response. You can just give it a summary and continue that conversation. So that reduces the input size and again, helps with faster processing. And you might notice that if you go out and interact with Gemini yourself. Reduce the token limits. So even if you're not having a large prompt that you're sending in, actually adjusting the token limit parameter to be lower is going to help with latency there. I would encourage you to try different models. I think there is some perception that I have to go 1.5 Flash to get the latest and greatest. But remember that they are, optimized for different things. So 1.5 has like the million token limit, and it's optimized for speed. But you're probably not using a million tokens if you're, just asking for an Explore URL. That's not to say that it's not faster. It's just worth testing out. Also, you've got a model like Text Bison, which we've used in the past, when it's optimized to handle text, where Gemini is multimodal. I've also heard people have had good response with Llama, and there's a lot of third-party models. So play around with it. It's an easy thing just to switch out the model in the call. I would just experiment, because remember, it's an art. It's not a science. There's no black and white. You don't know ahead of time what the output is going to be, which I think drives some of you data science people crazy. But just experiment with it and iterate and maintain, because what works today, you might be able to optimize something a little bit different tomorrow, especially considering how fast the LLM model landscape is changing all the time, even just within the Google ecosystem. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Amanda. That was really useful. I've got some questions that came up to me, just came top of mind for me as you were going through it. But for those on the webinar, if you drop any questions you have on the chat in either LinkedIn or on YouTube, we will see them here and would love to get them answered as well. So please send those through. Let me change the look here. So the first one, I guess, was a clarification that I wanted to make, which was you mentioned trying different models. But it sounds like the only one in Vertex today that you can actually fine tune is Gemini 1.0. So there's, I guess, a trade-off there. Is that right? Between with few shot, you can use any model. And then once you've gone to fine tuning, you're kind of restricted to Gemini 1.0.
As of today.
Yeah. Okay.
There's other models too. Like there's Text Bison there that's available. But that being said, that changes all the time. And I heard that I think maybe by September or sometime after that, you're going to see 1.5 there. So just know that as they're releasing models, then they will become available.
Okay. And in terms of when people should think about needing to fine tune, is there what's the heuristic that you see the most? Is it hey, you've hit 50 examples, or is it, hey, response time has gotten slow? What's the thing that typically makes you guys think, yeah, you know what, it's time to architect this a little differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have one answer there. There's definitely been some different experiences. One that I'm working with right now, latency is incredibly important to them. They're like, it has to be super quick. And it's not only this step that we're doing. There's multi steps in the response they're looking for. So for example, they are doing like an entity recognition and trying to understand the intent of the user. So that's one step that has to happen, because again, it's a very large deployment, very large organization. Lots of different intents could be there. So that's one step that's already happening after I ask the question. And then another step right now is, which Explorer should I use? So we have to figure out, how do I route to the right Explorer? Things like that. So when I'm seeing that we're adding a lot of steps, and then I think they have a summarization after that. So when I'm seeing a lot of steps, where can I possibly think about ways to cut back on that latency? That could be an answer. And again, it's not black and white, because it could be that you go tune 1.0 and it's slower than including all of those examples in 1.5 that has the million token limit. So those are experiments that we're going through, and it's a pretty simple one to do. So I think it's worth it.
Okay, that makes sense. And so speaking about those experiments, how do you, when you're testing and evaluating these changes, different models, fine tuning of different models, is there a quantitative way that you're able to test that? Like, is there a way that you can say, hey, this scenario produces a score of this and this combination produces a score of that? Or is it largely qualitative, just user testing and like, it's obviously more than vibes, but just like kind of people assessing it in a qualitative way as they're going through that? Like, is there a way of quantifying those changes?
I'm sure there probably is, and maybe there's somebody in the audience who's dealt with that a little bit more than we have. In the specific use cases that we've had so far, it's been really difficult to be able to do that, because we're not deeply ingrained in their organization. We really need somebody to go in and be like, when I asked that, that's not really what I meant. So it's really, I think right now that's a challenging problem to answer, but really curious if anybody has solved that problem before.
Cool. That makes sense. A couple more here for people who are watching. Um, I guess the question is there a way to generate JSON examples automatically? Is there a way to use maybe the system activity data or like ways to automate some of that process? Is there anything you guys have been able to do there?
The system activity for sure. But the problem is you get the Explorer response, but not necessarily the question the way that the user might ask it. That's been challenging for us specifically. It gives us, because a lot of the times the way we engage is we'll say, we need your help because we don't know what questions and answers. Like we've narrowed it down to an Explorer. Maybe we're looking at one particular dashboard to help them like really focus, because I think it's an overwhelming ask. But something like system activity then is like, here's explorers. Can you go tell me what questions you might ask to get that answer? And maybe we can help with that, and you need to validate it. But it is somewhat of a shortcut, at least.
Yeah. Okay. We've been thinking a little about the team at Spectacles built a tool called TLDD, which was like a dashboard summarizing tool as part of a hackathon recently. And it occurred to me that there might be a way to do this in an automated way where you find the most popular system queries from system activity, you render them with the Looker API, and then you actually pass them to like a multimodal Gemini model and say like, what does it look like this is trying to answer? And then you still definitely need like, I'm not advocating for anyone to go and just like throw that data directly into production. You probably still need a human in the loop. But there's a way, it felt like maybe there's a way of seeding this data with like, here's the URL and here's our best guess at like, and it's probably going to be a little rigid, but like our best guess at what's being asked here, because we've rendered it, we've passed it to Gemini, we've asked it to kind of reverse engineer it. So I'm interested to see if people end up going down that route to kind of seed that data.
That is fascinating. Yeah, and I think we're definitely seeing more and more of using Gemini to tune Gemini or ask questions like, Gemini, write this prompt for me, or, definitely been interesting. Not 100%, but usually a good starting point anyways.
Cool. A question from someone in the chat. You kind of talked about there being kind of like maybe at either end of a spectrum, a few shot prompt where you're stuffing all the examples in and fine tuning as kind of the alternative. Have you guys, and if no, just let me know, but have you guys given any thought to or seen people use embeddings and like vector databases to only insert the subset of examples that seem most relevant to that question as a means of trying to reduce I guess like the token size, the amount of that prompt? So you may have 3,000 examples, but you always only find the most relevant 25 or anything like that. Is that something I guess you guys have explored, or you've seen any of your customers, clients trying to implement around these things?
Definitely thought about it. We haven't had a use case where it made sense to go that far. But that being said, I think that goes back to some of those larger deployments where it's like, what is the intent here so that I can appropriately navigate? And I think that embeddings could pretty naturally fit within that solution. And I think if it's, I wouldn't over engineer. Like if you're happy with the response, like, okay, great. But if you are really struggling with not getting it routed the right way, or maybe you want to try to improve some latency there, I think it's definitely a viable option to try.
Cool. And then the final question, I think I'm understanding it correctly, but apologies to the person who asked it if I'm misinterpreting it. Um, it sounds like they're asking, have you found ways for the Explore Assistant to define custom dimensions, custom measures, table calcs? Is that something that has been in scope for anything you guys have done, or anything like that? Or is that still kind of
No,
like yet to be trodden territory?
that is yet to be seen, but I am absolutely fascinated by that thought. Because if it can go in the URL, like in theory, you should be able to do it, right? Kind of
Yeah,
the same thing with like theming and colors and.
I have no idea if you can include a table calc in an Explore URL. So I guess the answer is, if you can do that in theory, as long as you provide enough training data,
Right.
it's all possible.
Yep. Because I've
Cool.
definitely had questions around like, can I make it a certain color or whatever like that? Like with an Explorer, you should be able to, but yeah, I think it's a matter of how do you give it that proper context.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's the end of all our questions here. Amanda, big thank you for joining us today. This is really enjoyed the presentation. Really enjoyed your answers to all the questions. I'm sure we'll have you or another member of the Bytecode team on again sometime soon. So yeah, just thank you very much for joining, and to everyone on the stream, again, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your input. It always makes these presentations really interesting and enjoyable from our point of view. And as I said, our next one is 7 days away. So we'll have the team from Paradigm joining us then to talk about end-to-end testing across DBT and Looker with Paradigm and Spectacles. So please make sure, head to spectacles.dev. You can sign up for the webinar there, and please make sure to join us. So yeah, Amanda, final thank you to you, and really appreciate you joining us.